Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. And now we are moving towards our next part of this series, Azure Beginners to Professional. In this series, uh, we have seen that in the first part, like we worked on the groups, users, and then some licensing details. After that, Azure device registration, hybrid Azure machine joinings, and all. So now moving towards the Azure AD Connect. As we have seen that what exactly happen if you have a on-premises infrastructure, like you have a on-prem active directory, which we can see it sorry the, the on-prem active directory, that is the existing infra available in your organization on premises, this one. And if you want to integrate that environment with your Office 365, or we can say an Azure active directory, the directory in the cloud. So what we have to do, we have to sync all those objects like the user IDs, groups into cloud. To sync all those objects, we have to use this solution. So sometimes you have seen that the people always say the Azure Active Directory Connect or Azure AD Connect in the short form, this term. So they say that okay, the Azure AD Connect that basically used to sync objects to cloud, but this is not the reality. The Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync is responsible to sync the objects, whereas the Azure AD Connect is a solution that basically bridge your an on-premises Active Directory with your cloud-based Active Directory. So always remember this part. The Azure AD Connect is a complete solution, whereas the Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync is basically responsible to sync your object. This is just a component or a part of this entire solution, whereas the Azure AD Connect that is also helps you to set up password configuration, federated integration, health monitoring. So all these are the part of this Azure Active Directory Connect, whereas the synchronization is just one component. So this is the cloud sync which is responsible. This is the cloud sync feature associated in Azure AD Connect. So Azure AD Connect is a complete solution that basically bridge an organization on-premises Active Directory with your cloud-based Azure Active Directory. So the first component, which is known as synchronization. So the synchronization is the responsibility or used to sync your on-premises objects in the cloud, whereas the password hash synchronization, we will take it out in one by one, all of them. It's basically used as a signing authentication method. This one is also a signing authentication method. This is another signing authentication method. So these three are the sign-in authentication method. We will discuss this in the upcoming slide as well in the more details. So, and the last one, which is health monitoring. So health monitoring is also used to monitor the health of your organization Azure Active Directory Connect, whereas the synchronization health mainly you have to monitor it, even though you have an option for the sign-in and other authentication monitorings as well. So let's come here and we can see it what exactly. Here you can see the users and the devices are there that basically used to sign in with the help of Azure Active Directory, so they can able to access the various resources that are available in the cloud. To do the same, what we have a synchronization between on-premises and the cloud, because the user identity exists here, the account which is created in the on-premises. So what I will do, I will sync my object to the cloud, then user can able to access those resources that are mainly based on Azure AD. So this solution, the Azure AD Connect, that solution helps to set up synchronization. That means the objects that exist in the on-premises AD can be synced to the cloud, whereas the password hash, pass-through, or the federation, these three are the sign-in authentication strategies whereas the health monitoring is used to monitor the health of Azure health of Azure AD Connect. So when this situations occur, suppose normally you have an organization where you are running an normal AD or a domain controller based Active Directory. If you are running that services, and now you are trying to switch it to the cloud, like into Azure AD. In such situation, you have to set up first an hybrid environment, and this call is hybrid environment. So hybrid environment is something where you have a on-premises infra as well as you have a cloud infra, and you might sync the data from on-prem to cloud. So these are the situations when we have to use the Azure AD Connect. Whereas the Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, as I mentioned with that, the Azure AD Connect is a complete solution, whereas the Cloud Sync is one component. So this is basically responsible to sync your on-premises AD to Azure Active Directory. Once you provision that, you have to download an agent and you have to install it and configure it. That will ensure the data synchronization from your on-premises Active Directory, that is your users, your groups, all those that you can sync it to the cloud. Once it syncs to the cloud, then you can assign the services. For example, email, Exchange Online, Teams. That services you can assign it to the identity that is basically exists here. So the username and password, everything is created in the on-premises. Once you sync that object to the cloud, you can assign the services, and once user trying to access that particular service, their authentication is handled by this on-premises Active Directory. What are the supported authentication methods? We can see that in the upcoming slide as well. Before moving to the authentication, let me just quickly show you in the portal how it looks like. Okay, so you can see it over here. Once you log in your Azure Active Directory portal, you can see there's an option Azure AD Connect in the left side. Once I click on that Azure AD Connect, when I clicked on this Azure AD Connect, you can see the provision from the Active Directory. Right now, it's disabled all the authentication user sign in because I haven't set up that. Last sync you can see has never run because it's not run till now. Here you can see the download Azure AD Connect. So once I click on the download Azure AD Connect, I can able to download or we can say the AD Connect agent will be downloaded over there. Once you install that solution, then you can able to sync your data. I have already created one video that is it's already in my channel, the overview of Azure AD Connect, whereas you can see the all the installation steps, syncing of all the objects. So everything is already there in the same solution. You can check it out and see it. I think it's playing once again a video. Okay, so in my channel it's already there. You can go and you can watch this complete video. I will put the link for this video in the description box, so you can take it this link and see all the steps to install and the monitor that require a complete detailed activity list. So you can take it this video link and just watch if you want to learn how to install it, how to configure it, and how to assign the services. So this is a complete dedicated video. Is mainly related and focused on this directory synchronization and assignments only. Let's just go back on my content. So this is the portal. Once you synchronize and enable it, you can see the updated details over here, or the provisioning details. You can what you will be getting here. The same thing, the users, once you sync, you can see the user list will be appears here, and that users are mainly not exist on the cloud. It will be showing as on premises. Here the on premises is no, because all from the cloud, but once it's syncing from the on-prem, you will see that part as a yes. Whereas if I go here and if I see on the active users, I can also see the list of those users available in the Office 365 portal as well. So from the both ways, you can check, you can assign the services from here for the on-premises users. Let's just go back over here and see. So Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, that functionality enables you or the syncing of data from on-prem to cloud. Whereas the others section of the same, like password synchronization and other components. So we can just take it out. What are those? So these are the authentication methods. So once we are setting up an hybrid environment, three types of authentication can be in place. What are those? The first one is PHS. It's called as password hash synchronization. That simply sync your username and the password from on-premises to cloud. I will cover each of them one by one in the next slide in more detail. The second authentication type is PTA, that is pass-through authentication. Pass-through is one of the most common authentication used nowadays. It's basically validate the credentials from the on-premises, and there is an agent that is running on the on-premises domain controller that will ensure the authentication for the credentials which are entered in the Azure Active Directory. I will explain all of them one by one in the next slide as well. The third one is the federated authentication, whereas the request is redirected to, third one is the federated one. So in the federated authentication, request is redirected to the ADFS or any federated authentication services. For example, ADFS. ADFS is one of the authentication service or federation service that helps to authenticate user request. Let's take a look one by one, each of them, how it's basically authenticating those methods. Okay, the first one is the password hash sync. So password hash sync, as I mentioned, the user credentials are synced from on-premises to the cloud. This is my on-premises Active Directory. This is my Azure AD Connect that is responsible to syncing the data. It syncs to the cloud, and user sign in can be user can sign in with the help of this Azure Active Directory. So the step number one, if I take it out, what happened, or we can say it's a first prerequisite step or pre-steps are there, syncing of on-prem to cloud, that is on-prem AD to Azure AD. What it's going to sync? It will sync username, password both. Username and password both will be synced. So this is the prerequisite. It will happen first. Once it's done, then suppose user is trying to access their emails. That is in cloud itself. So what happened in the Azure AD? This is my Azure AD. Once user send a request to access the data as a step number one, what happened? It will authenticate it by themselves. How? Because the Azure Active Directory contains user credentials, full information, that is username and the password, both information exist in the Azure Active Directory. So what will happen? It's the authentication will be done from here, and user can able to access the service as a step number two. Like it's a direct authentication that has been handled by Azure Active Directory because the data is already synced from on-prem to cloud. This is the first one, the password hash synchronization authentication. Here, the working scenario, you can see it for the password hash synchronization. The data is already synced from on-prem to cloud. Whereas user sent a password, if you want to access, you can simply access it in the on-premises. Whereas if you want to access it, the cloud services, you can access it in the cloud services because the username and the password, both information is synced with each other. So if I'm logging in the corporate network, like my desktop or a laptop which is belongs to my on-premises environment, I can able to access that. Whereas if my email account exists in the cloud, I can able to access it from the cloud as well, because my username and password both are synced with each other, with on-prem AD to Azure AD. We can directly access those services. To enable the password hash synchronization, we can simply select the password hash synchronization at the time of user sign in. This is the Azure AD Connect wizard. If I let me go back on the video that I was showing to you. So here you can see the pass-through, same as one is the password hash, which is okay. You can see this is the password hash synchronization. The video of link is in description box, so you can take it, this video link. It's also in the same channel with the description, Office 365 Azure AD Connect. So from there, here you can see that and watch this in more detail if you want to see how it's basically working. Let me just go back on my presentation once again. Okay, so here you can see the password hash synchronization. You can select it, click next, and it will ask the certain few details to set up the same, and that you can also check it out from the video, what are the steps are required. Then we have a second, pass-through authentication. So pass-through, as the name you can understand, pass-through, that means something which is getting passed. So what exactly happened? Once user is trying to sign in, the information is synced to the cloud. Like what information? The user ID, not the password. Password is not syncing to the cloud. So what exactly happened in the backend? There's an Active Directory which is running. This is Azure AD Connect that syncs the identity information, like the user identity is synced to the cloud. Now once user is trying to sign in, the Azure AD send authentication request or pass this authentication request to Azure to on-premises Active Directory. You can see this is the pass-through, and how it's recognized where your domain controller or the Active Directory service is running. For that, it's holding agent. So the agent is basically authentication agent which is running on your domain controller. So it runs, and that ensures the connectivity between Azure Active Directory and your on-premises Active Directory. So what exactly happened? The request is sent to on-premises AD, and once the authentication is successful, then user can able to access their services. For example, as a step number 1, first we can take a prerequisite. Prerequisite is syncing of your objects, that is your user ID. User ID must be synced to the cloud. That would be responsibility handled by Azure AD Connect Sync, or we can say Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync. That component ensures that the syncing of your user ID to Azure Active Directory. Once this data is synced, then as a step number 1, if user is trying to log in, user send a request for the login. User want to access, suppose, their emails. So user send a request as a step number 1. Step number 2, it will reach out to Azure AD to on-prem As a second step, it will be sending to for authentication. If the authentication is successful, the return from on-prem to Azure AD once again. Next step, user can able to access service. So these are the 4 steps that are primarily involved. User is trying to access the services, for example, email. This service user want to access. Now user send and sign in request to Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory send this request to on-prem AD. After successful authentication, this Azure AD will get a final confirmation. Okay, this authentication is successful, and then user can able to access the services. So this is the pass-through authentication uh, strategy. How it's basically working, you can see that this is the another scenario. Whereas user send and sign in request, it's come to the Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory send that request through pass-through agent, the pass-through agent which is running on your on-premises domain controller. So that request is reach out to your on-premises Windows Server Active Directory. Once this authentication is successful, the successful authentication request sent back to Microsoft Azure Cloud, and then that Azure Active Directory gives a user permission to access the particular resource that they are trying to access it. For example, Office 365 or any other services like Teams or Salesforce, anything that is based or integrated with the Azure Active Directory. So the authentication process, you can see that that has been handled by Windows Active Directory, which is in the on-premises. In HashSync, the password is already synced to the cloud, whereas in pass-through, the authentication password is not synced to the cloud. It will still remain in the on-prem, and the authentication request will always come to on-premises. And this one is in the nowadays, if you have a hybrid environment, this is one of the most popular methodology that is being used by the various organizations as well. To enable the pass-through authentication, you can select the second option, and then it will move to the next as a step from here. Entire steps and the activities that I have already mentioned, if you go on the video which I shared as a link, so you can take it a link from here, and the pass-through authentication details that has been configured in this video. So how to connect, how to do all the steps that are mentioned, you can take it from there. Okay, the third one is the federated authentication. What exactly the federated authentication is? Basically, the federated authentication is basically redirect your request to your federation server. How it's basically working. So if you have a multi-layered environment, for example, this is an optional section, the perimeter. If you don't want to use, you can remove this perimeter and the federation proxies section as well. In that scenario, you have to publish your federation server directly to the internet, which is not a recommended approach. That's why it's recommended to put up perimeter network federation server, and then place your federation server in the backend and put the federation proxy in the perimeter network. What exactly happened in this situation? The prerequisite is same. You must have a prerequisite is that you must sync your identity to the cloud. Identity only, that is username. That is username that you can sync to the cloud. So the username must be synced to the cloud. That is the one requirement that is coming over here. Once the user ID is synced to the cloud, and that is in Azure Active Directory, and that has been handled by Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync feature. So that will sync the data from here to cloud. Once it syncs, and whenever the user is trying to access the data like their email or their Teams or any resource which is based on Azure Active Directory, so what happened, their request is redirected to federation server, and this federation server is responsible to authenticate it from the Active Directory. So once the authentication is successful, the successful confirmation token is sent back, and then user can able to access the resources. So as a step number one, if I ask, then it would be user send a request to Azure AD. Azure AD. This will basically redirect your request to on-prem, or we can say your ADFS server. As a step number two, what exactly happened? Sorry. As a step number two, what exactly happened? It will redirect the request from Azure AD to on-premises like that. And this on-premises is your ADFS server. Earlier, what happened, if you go in the previous one, which is, let me just go back. this pass-through authentication. Pass-through, what exactly happened? The Azure Active Directory sending request to on-prem and taking back the confirmation from on-prem to cloud. User request is not redirecting. User URL is not getting changed. But here what exactly happened? In federated authentication, the user request is redirected to ADFS server. That means you're trying to log in here, but you will be redirected to this location. In pass-through, this is responsible to send data request here and taking back the confirmation. Now your request is redirecting to here, and here you have to authenticate it through the federation server. Once you will be authenticated from here, and this federation server, from where it will authenticate it from the Active Directory. So it will internally authenticate, and then this will confirm to Azure AD, okay, you can grant the permission to access this particular resource as the authentication is successful, which is not the case in the pass-through authentication. Pass-through, the Azure AD sender request and taking back the confirmation with the help of the agent which is running on the domain controller. Here, this federation server is authenticating user from Active Directory within the organization. Let's take a look how it's basically. You can see it over here. Once user is trying to access the resource, or user is trying to access the resource from the Active Directory, what happened? Their request is redirected to, if it is a internal user, directly redirected to directory server. If it isn't coming from the external one, obviously this request is redirected from through web proxy application, or we can say your ADFS server. And that federation ensures that, okay, if the user is successfully granted the authentication, the request confirmation is sent to cloud and user can able to access it. For this, there's a prerequisite. You must have a ADFS server installed at your on-premises infrastructure. If you do not have a ADFS server, it will not be possible to authenticate with the help of federation services. Third party, certain federation services also available for the authentication purpose. Whereas if you want to put in high availability, as we have if you are putting a single server for the ADFS, might be there is a high availability issue or HA. So for those type of situations, we can create a form for the ADFS. So a form of ADFS server is a multiple server that exists in the form. So you can create an ADFS form, and then it's require a public certificate as well for the authentication purpose. And once you configure your ADFS servers, basically, or we can say it's a form that you configure for the ADFS server, like this is your URL for the same. You have to publish this URL over internet, and that also required a public CA certificate as well, because it will be published to internet, and then Microsoft only integrate you whenever you have a ADFS server which is published over internet with the public certificate, a public CA certificate. So this is how this authentication will go, the entire process. If you want to see the entire process, you can just check it out the video which is already in the link for this authentication. And let's take a look what else we have in the portal. So this is the way you can authenticate all three type of authentications. And once I configure it in the Azure AD Connect portal, I can see whatever the possible situations, like the federation is enabled. You can see it over here. If this single sign-on, that will be available as well. Pass-through authentication, that is again it's available over here. So whatever the things are enabled, you can see it over here, as well as if the agents that are running on the machine, you will get that information as well. When I clicked on the Manage Azure AD Cloud Sync, if I click on the same, I can see where all the agents that are running, we can download that configurations, because right now I haven't created it here in this environment, so it's not giving me that option. But if you go and configure it like that way, this way, which I already shared to all you guys as a link, so in that way you will see the information available as well over here. Once the user identities are created and exist, then you can able to assign it with respect to the different services. So this is all about in this video related to Azure AD Connect and the type of authentications that are supported. We always remember Azure AD Connect is a complete solution, whereas the Cloud Sync is a one part for the same, and the authentication of different type of authentications that are covering as a other part component of the same authentication strategy, or the same authentication methodologies, which is again a part of your Azure AD Connect. So thank you so much for watching this video, and if you have not subscribed the channel, you can subscribe it. I will be uploading a next part as well soon. Thanks to you so much.